7 young men, one group that redefined what a music career could look like. BTS didn't just sell records, they built a global phenomenon from a small Seoul studio with almost no industry backing. But here's what most people overlook. Behind every stage performance, every tearful speech, every honest Weverse post, there are real human relationships that shaped these 7 in ways most fans have never fully connected. Not the fan service moments, not the scripted variety show chemistry, the actual people, outside the cameras, who changed the direction of their lives. A father who almost derailed one member's entire career. A rival who became a lifeline. A sibling relationship so raw it was turned into one of the most personal songs in their discography. A mentor connection that HYBE's own history quietly erases. These aren't rumors. These aren't fan theories. Every single one of these stories came directly from the members themselves in interviews, vlogs, Festa dinners, and moments they chose to share on their own terms. 7 members. 7 relationships that actually matter. Let's get into it. Number 7. The 6 brothers who built him. Jungkook. Think about what it actually means to leave home at 13 years old. Not for a vacation, not for a school trip permanently. You pack a bag, you say goodbye to your parents and your older brother, and you move to a city you barely know to become something you're not sure you can be yet. That's the exact situation Jungkook was in when he signed with Big Hit Entertainment in 2011 and relocated from Busan to Seoul. He had auditioned for the talent show Superstar K, wasn't selected, received casting offers from 7 different entertainment companies, and ultimately chose Big Hit not because of the company's reputation, but because of one person, RM, whom he saw perform during the audition process. That single impression of a rapper he didn't yet know would set the entire course of his life. What most people don't fully register is what that relocation cost him developmentally. Jungkook arrived in Seoul at 15, describing himself as someone who had nothing, a boy who felt the world was enormous and he was very small. His biological family, his parents and his older brother Junghyun, were hours away in Busan. The people physically present in his daily life, the ones he ate with, practiced with, argued with, and fell asleep near, were 6 other young men who were technically his label mates. But that's not what they became. Here's where it gets layered. When BTS members gathered to discuss their individual hardships during the production of the Wings album, Jungkook broke down crying and said something that stopped the room. "There was nothing that is difficult for me. I came in at a young age, signed the contract without knowing anything, sang and danced because that's what I wanted. What pains me is the members being in pain, who are helping me and are living with me." That statement is not a rehearsed line. That's a teenager articulating in real time that his capacity for personal suffering had been rewired. Other people's pain hurt him more than his own. That confession became the entire emotional foundation of the song. Begin. Jungkook initially tried to write the lyrics himself since it was his own story, but found it extremely difficult. He asked RM to write them for him, and RM worked from that exact moment from what Jungkook had said while crying to reconstruct his inner world into words. RM later explained, "Jungkook never says he's stressed or under pressure. The only time I heard him express such feelings was when he saw the rest of us go through the bad weathers. I took the idea from that and tried to embody his strong spirit." One leader translating another member's emotions into music because that member couldn't yet find the language himself. That's not a PR. Story. That's what 6 years of shared living actually produces. When the finished song was first played for the other members, Jungkook cried. When they asked why he was embarrassed, he said it was because the song was dedicated to them. He wasn't embarrassed by the vulnerability of the lyrics. He was embarrassed to have that vulnerability witnessed by the exact people it was about. Meanwhile, his actual biological brother, Junghyun, built his own life quietly. In December 2020, Jungkook transferred ownership of an apartment in Yongsan District, Seoul, valued at approximately 4 billion Korean won to his older brother. No press release, no public announcement. A younger brother, now one of the most recognized faces on the planet, giving a multi-million-dollar property to his sibling as simply as passing something across a table. And Junghyun, for his part, had previously maintained a public Instagram filled with fan art and animations celebrating BTS milestones, drawings of the members, recreations of iconic moments, all made by someone who watched his little brother become a global phenomenon and responded by becoming one of his most enthusiastic fans. 2 sets of brothers, one biological, one forged in a training room in Seoul. Jungkook holds both with equal weight, and the fact that he turned the second kind into a song that made him cry in front of the very people it honored says more about who he is than almost anything else in BTS's entire catalog. The next relationship on this list belongs to a member whose bond with one person quietly shaped every single thing BTS would eventually become. Number 6. The man who built BTS around one teenager, RM. In 2010, South Korea's music industry was completely controlled by 3 companies, SM, YG, and JYP. They had the infrastructure, the training facilities, the industry connections, and the track record. A small, struggling company called Big Hit Entertainment had none of those things. What it did have was one producer who had spent years writing hits for other people and was now betting everything on a completely unproven concept, a hip-hop idol group. And the entire bet rested on a 16-year-old underground rapper from Ilsan who had just walked through his door. That teenager was Kim Namjoon. In 2009, RM had auditioned for Big Deal Records, passing the first round but failing the second after forgetting his lyrics. Following that audition, rapper Sleepy exchanged contact information with him and later mentioned RM to Big Hit Entertainment producer Podog. That chain of connections, one underground rapper passing a phone number to a producer, set everything in motion. In 2010, Sleepy contacted RM and encouraged him to audition for Big Hit CEO Bang Si-hyuk. Bang offered RM a spot at the label, and RM accepted immediately and without his parents' knowledge. Read that again. He was 16. He made one of the most consequential decisions of his life, and the lives of 6 other people he hadn't even met yet, without telling his family. The relationship between RM and Bang Si-hyuk is where BTS actually begins. Not in a practice room, not on a stage in that single audition where one producer saw something worth restructuring his entire business model around. Bang Si-hyuk later described the moment directly. Producer Podog brought him RM's demo tape and said, "This is what the young kids are into." RM was 15 at the time. Bang signed him immediately. And then, the question became what to do with him. Bang had initially considered forming a hip-hop crew, not an idol group, but when he weighed the business context, he concluded that a K-pop idol model made more sense. Many trainees who wanted to pursue hip-hop didn't want to be in an idol band and left. RM, Suga, and J-Hope stayed, and they became BTS's musical pillars. That detail about the trainees who left is easy to pass over. It shouldn't be. The entire commercial structure of BTS, the idol format that gave them the reach to eventually sell out stadiums worldwide, was a compromise. The hip-hop foundation was always there, but it got wrapped in something with broader mass appeal, specifically because Bang made that call, and because RM trusted it enough to stay when others didn't. RM described this period in his own words. "I was an underground rapper and only 16 years old, a freshman at high school. Bang thought I had potential as a rapper and lyricist, and we went from there." Short sentence, enormous weight. That "we went from there" covers 3 years of grueling training, pre-debut tracks, writing songs for other artists, and slowly building something out of nothing. RM also wrote songs for girl group Glam during his trainee period, including their debut single work that paid the bills for a company that was still far from financially stable. He was not just a trainee being molded, he was a working contributor to the company's survival before BTS had released a single official track. And that arrangement between them, Bang giving RM room to be a real artist, RM giving the company real labor in return, became the DNA of how BTS would eventually operate. Members who weren't just performers, but writers, producers, and creative decision-makers. At the 2022 BTS Festa dinner, RM reflected on what that chain of events had meant to him. "In this universe, luckily I wanted to do music, and luckily I got in this company and met Bang Si-hyuk PD, met Big Hit, and I met these guys that are even more talented than I. He framed it in terms of parallel universes, the version of himself that became an office worker, the version that followed the academic path his grades and IQ could have taken him down. The version that actually happened required Bong Si-hyuk to look at a teenager's demo tape and decide it was worth tearing up his original business plan. That decision, made in a room RM wasn't even in, changed everything. The next member on this list has a relationship that almost didn't happen at all, and the person who saved it wasn't management. Number 5. The two relationships that almost erased him from BTS. J-Hope. There are 7 members in BTS, but for a short window before their 2013 debut, there were only 6. Jung Ho-seok, J-Hope, had already left. He was gone. And the reason he came back involves 2 completely separate relationships, each pulling at him from a different direction, and neither of them gets told in full very often. Start with the pre-debut story, because the facts here are specific and verified. On a past episode of BTS's Burn the Stage, the members gathered and began reminiscing about the past. The conversation turned serious when they recalled how J-Hope had dropped out from the debut lineup before BTS officially formed. He wasn't removed, he chose to leave. J-Hope missed his family and found it difficult being away from them. He also might have felt unsure about the venture being taken on by the fledgling production company and his part in it. Big Hit at that point was a small company with no guaranteed future. The idol industry is a gamble under the best conditions. For a teenager from Gwangju who had been cut from JYP's auditions and was now training at a company that hadn't yet produced a single successful act, the math didn't look good. What happened next is the part that tends to get condensed into a footnote, but it deserves full attention. Jimin recalled during the Burn the Stage episode that J-Hope said he was leaving, then hugged Jungkook and they cried together. A teenager saying goodbye to people he'd been living and training with, not because of a fight, not because of a contract dispute, but because he'd simply lost faith that any of it was going to work. RM, being the group's leader, went straight to Big Hit management and told them the group needed J-Hope in the debut lineup. His exact words, "I told them we needed Jung Ho-seok. We need Jung Ho-seok, we can't make it without him. I worked really hard to convince them." That's a 16 or 17-year-old kid going to company management and staking his credibility on another member's value. Not privately, not gently, directly, and emphatically. J-Hope eventually returned to the group. When he explained why, he said, "Ah, really? Back then, I came back because I trusted you guys. We worked together for a long time. It's because the members were there. He didn't come back because the company convinced him. He came back because RM's belief in him specifically and the bond with the people in that building outweighed the fear. That distinction matters enormously. Management can offer contracts and arguments. What RM offered was something different, a declaration that this group was incomplete without a specific person. That kind of specific belief is harder to walk away from. Then there's the second relationship in J-Hope's story, which operates on an entirely different register. His older sister, Jung Ji-woo, is 4 years his senior and has built a publicly documented life that runs parallel to his fame rather than dependent on it. She is the CEO of fashion company AJ Look, eyewear brand Fundamental, and mask pack brand Neef Neef. She has nearly 11 million Instagram followers and 2 million YouTube subscribers, numbers she built independently, not by writing her brother's name, but by establishing her own brand identity in the Korean fashion and influencer space years before most fans knew she existed. What makes their relationship worth examining isn't the business. Success, it's what J-Hope actually uses her for. During a 2025 episode of I Live Alone filmed in Los Angeles, J-Hope met up with Jiwoo and told her directly, "I've been working on my songs. I like them, but there are a few things I'm worried about," he confessed to her. "I'm working with all the renowned producers, so there is pressure for me to do well. The time is limited and I know what I need to do, but there is still pressure." He was preparing a solo album at that point, and the person he chose to articulate that pressure to, not a bandmate, not a manager, was his sister in a restaurant in LA. He explained his approach to family. "I share a lot of my worries with my family since they're my family, but then I can't share everything with them. It's because I believe I can endure my hardships on my own. That tension, wanting to be held by someone who knew him before any of this, while also protecting them from the full weight of it, is something J-Hope has spoken about openly, and that you almost never hear from idols this directly. 2 relationships. One that put him in BTS when he was ready to walk away, and one that gives him somewhere to put the parts of himself that fame can't contain. The next member on this list has a relationship built entirely in secret, one that shaped his most personal music before almost anyone knew it existed. Number 4, the parent who tore up his lyrics, Suga. Min Yoongi grew up in Daegu with a brown upright piano in the corner of the family home. Nobody told him it would become the single most important relationship of his adolescent life, certainly not his parents, who had different ideas about what his future was supposed to look like. What makes Suga's story genuinely distinct from the standard "parents didn't believe in me" narrative is how specifically and honestly he has documented every stage of that conflict, the opposition, the consequences, the psychiatric ward visit, and eventually, the incomplete reconciliation, all in his own music, in his own voice, under his own name. Start with the piano, because that's where it actually begins. In the Wings concept book interview, Suga described First Love this way. It's a song that contains many meanings. First love refers to the piano I played when I was young and also the only friend I had. I cried a lot when recording the track. In the second half, where I explode the feelings, I kept tearing up. An only friend. Not a hobby, not a pastime, the only friend. That framing tells you exactly how isolated Yoongi felt during the years that shaped him. The song is a rap serenade to his childhood piano that personifies his relationship with the instrument, as if addressing a friend, and woven through it is the shape of a boy who found in an inanimate object what he wasn't, finding in the people around him. Unconditional acceptance. His parents' position on that music was direct and documented. Suga's parents even ripped up his lyrics at times because rap was a genre they never listened to and thus never understood. He told Rolling Stone, "They didn't understand rap music. It's natural that they were against what I was doing. I think that helped me work harder because there was something that I had to prove." That reframe turning opposition into motivation is the version of the story that reads cleanly. But Suga didn't stop there. He went further, into territory that the K-pop industry almost never allows its artists to occupy publicly. In 2016, Suga released his debut mixtape Aegis D for free on SoundCloud. No label oversight, no company direction, just songs he had been sitting on for years. The track called The Last is the one that documented what the conflict with his family and his own mind had actually cost him. The lyrics describe depression and OCD returning periodically, sociophobia developing around age 18, and a specific memory. On the first visit to the psychiatric ward, my parents came up with me. We listened to the consultation together. My parents said they don't truly understand me. I don't understand myself well either. Then who would understand? That line, parents sitting in a psychiatrist's office, admitting to a doctor that they don't truly understand their own son, is not a metaphor. He put a real memory into a song and released it to the world without filtering it into something more comfortable. He explained his reasoning directly. I wrote the lyrics thinking it could help others who are also anxious and depressed. And on his personal relationship with those conditions, anxiety and depression are always with me. I find it meaningful to figure out ways to deal with my anxiety and depression. I have to constantly study myself. This from a person who, at the time of that mixtape's release, was already one of the most recognized figures in South Korean pop music. The choice to publish that level of internal documentation under his own identity, not as BTS, not as Suga the Idol, but as August D, a name built from the reversed initials of his hometown Daegu, was a deliberate act of separation. He was choosing to be Min Yoongi, the kid who grew up in Daegu with a piano and parents who tore up his lyrics, not the performer on stage at award shows. Over time, his parents came to accept and support his career, especially after BTS achieved global recognition. But Suga has never revised his account of those earlier years into something warmer than it was. He documented the distance, the incomprehension, the psychiatric appointment, and then kept moving. The piano stayed. His parents caught up. The music was always the fixed point. The next member on this list has a relationship that runs in the opposite direction, not a parent who resisted, but a connection forged entirely through mutual recognition between two people who understood each other before the world understood either of them. Number 3. The woman who raised him and the concert he performed at her funeral, V. Kim Taehyung grew up in Gyeochang County, a rural area outside Daegu, where the family farmed, far from the music industry infrastructure of Seoul, far from the kind of environment that produces global pop stars. His father was a farmer, and because his parents were busy building a livelihood for the family, Taehyung was raised by his grandmother. This is not a minor biographical footnote. It means that the person who fed him, put him to sleep, disciplined him, knew his daily rhythms, and shaped the emotional architecture of his childhood was not his mother or father. It was an elderly woman in a rural South Korean village who liked trot music and served energy drinks to guests. Taehyung described this himself. In his own words, "She raised me for 14 years. She was like a parent to me. She was someone I could talk to about my hardships, what I wanted to do, what I wanted to eat and wine to." 14 years. That covers from infancy through the beginning of his trainee life. The person he called when something was wrong, the person who knew him before he was V, before he was an idol, before any of it was his grandmother. On the variety show You Quiz on the Block, he recalled sleeping in her room every night as a child, holding on to her. He described waking up with scribbles on his own face and on hers, made by his own hand while half asleep. That's not a sentimental anecdote, that's the texture of what it actually meant to be raised by someone. V's father supported his early musical ambitions, and with that backing, Taehyung began taking saxophone lessons in early middle school as a means of pursuing a music career. But it was the grandmother who held the emotional center of his life. She was the one he says he could be completely honest with. He left for Seoul to train with Big Hit in 2011 at 16. She stayed in Gyeochang. And then the geography of his career, the tours, the schedules, the world that BTS was building made it progressively harder to close that distance. His grandmother passed away in 2016 while BTS was on tour in the Philippines. He heard the news while overseas and later described how she was precious and was like a parent to him and apologized for not telling her, "I love you," sooner. The timing of her death carried its own particular weight. The day of her funeral was the same day BTS won their first award for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He was performing on a stage, celebrating a milestone for the group, while his grandmother was being buried. That collision of joy and grief, the inability to be in two places at once, to grieve and perform simultaneously, is something Taehyung has circled back to publicly many times since. On You Quiz on the Block, holding back tears, he said he wanted to show her, "I have grown up this big, but it was not to be." He described going to her cemetery with Bacchus, the energy drink she used to serve her guests, the same drink he used to steal bottles of as a child, and speaking to her. "Now my album is coming out. I will try my best for it to reach high enough where you are so you can listen." A grown man bringing a bottle of energy drink to a grave because it was his grandmother's drink and he wants her to have it. That's grief working through the specific language of a specific relationship. The song Winter Bear, which he released in 2019, was written about his grandmother's passing, a short, gentle ode to the process of grief. He wrote it in English, a language his grandmother didn't speak, which gives it its own kind of unreachability, a message composed for someone who can no longer receive it, in a language she never learned, from a stage she never got to see. 2 years later, his grandfather passed as well. Another loss that Taehyung had spoken of openly, having previously shared that he had many unforgettable memories with his grandfather as a child. Both the people who raised him were gone before BTS reached the height of their global recognition. The next relationship on this list runs in a completely different direction, not loss, but a bond documented in real time, across years of shared work, between two members who shaped each other's craft more than either has fully said out loud. Number 2. The teacher who almost blocked his path and then opened it, Jimin. Park Jimin arrived at Busan High School of Arts as the top-ranked student in the modern dance department. That's not a casual descriptor. It means he entered one of the most competitive performing arts schools in Busan and immediately placed first among all incoming students in his discipline. He was 17, trained in contemporary dance and popping, with a teacher who had been watching him develop for years and who was convinced, with legitimate reason, that Jimin was heading toward a serious career in professional dance. That teacher's name was Lee Hwa-song, and the relationship between them is one of the most precisely documented teacher-student dynamics in BTS's history because both sides of it were recorded in a public interview from both perspectives. Mr. Lee described Jimin at school this way. He was excellent in both his studies and dances, entering as the top student of his department. Whenever he was in the practice studio, he practiced more than anyone else. That picture of a student who went harder than everyone else in the room while still maintaining his academic standing is a consistent through line across every account of Jimin's pre-debut years. The director of the Just Dance Academy, where Jimin had trained before high school, described him similarly absorbing everything like a sponge, practicing on Sundays independently, and carrying a teachable attitude that made instructors want to gather around him. He wasn't just naturally talented. He was talented and relentless, which is a combination that creates a specific kind of problem. Teachers who genuinely care about a student's future become invested in directing that talent, which is exactly what happened when Jimin told Mr. Lee he wanted to audition for an idol company. Mr. Lee opposed it directly. When he said he was choosing popular dance over contemporary dance, I thought that it would be a loss of a valuable talent, and I couldn't help but look at the realistic situation of the tough path of a dance artist with a success that can't easily be guaranteed. That's why I opposed it. A teacher seeing a top student pivot from a disciplined, respected art form toward an industry with brutal odds and notoriously poor treatment of performers. The resistance makes complete sense from the outside. Contemporary dance has a path. You can build toward it. Idol auditions are a lottery where the terms of the contract, if you win, may not work in your favor. What Mr. Lee did next is the part that rarely gets told with full accuracy. He gave Jimin one condition. So when he told me he is taking an audition for producer Bong Si-hyuk, I told Jimin this is his last chance. After this audition, I told him you have to choose your path on becoming an idol or a modern dancer. But on that day, he passed the audition. An ultimatum that dissolved the moment Jimin walked out of the audition room, having been selected. And then the teacher did something that tells you who he actually is. He recalibrated. He said, "As far as I know, thousands of people took that audition, but Jimin was the only one that passed." So after that, I started to think he definitely has potential. He was wrong about the path, and he adjusted his position when the evidence changed. That's a rarer quality in a mentor than the opposition itself. Jimin was the last member added to the big hit lineup that became BTS, and he had the shortest trainee period of any member, just 6 months before debuting. 6 months! Every other member had trained for years. Jimin arrived in 2012 and was on stage in 2013. That compressed timeline is only possible because of what Mr. Lee and the Just Dance Academy had already built in him before Big Hit ever saw him. The contemporary dance foundation, the obsessive practice habits, the capacity to absorb and embody instruction instantly, none of that came from Seoul. It came from Busan, from a practice studio where a teenager stayed on Sundays when everyone else went home. Jimin's father, in the same interview, revealed that Jimin had written a detailed plan for his future, even as a middle school student, how he would study contemporary dance in high school, use that as a foundation, combine it with music, and become a performer. The plan predated the audition. The audition was just the door that the plan walked through. And the teacher who tried to close that door, then opened it, then watched from Busan as his former student became one of the most recognized performers in the world, still remembered the moment Jimin's father passed along a message from Jimin during a Japan tour years after graduation. Some professional relationships don't end when the class does. The final member on this list has a relationship that, of all 7, required him to walk away from the most and then come back changed. Number 1. The brother he used to hate, and the business they built together, Jin. Kim Seokjin, the eldest member of BTS, the one who was street-cast while getting off a bus and had no prior singing or dancing experience before becoming a K-pop idol, has a story that begins not in a practice room, but in a family home in Gwacheon, where he grew up alongside an older brother named Kim Seok-jung and spent most of his childhood actively disliking him. That's not an exaggeration. That's exactly how Jin described it. On camera, on a national television program. On an episode of You Quiz on the Block, Jin stated directly, "Up until high school, my brother was the person that I disliked the most. He would always be mean to me." He said it with the ease of someone who has long since processed it, but the statement is specific and deliberate. Not complicated feelings, not a complicated relationship. The most disliked person in his life was the person he shared a home with. That kind of early dynamic, the older sibling who holds power by virtue of birth order and uses it, the younger one who builds his identity partly in opposition, is something Jin has never softened in his public accounts of growing up. After the show aired, Seokjung took to Instagram to respond in classic older brother fashion. "Hello, this is former, the most hated person, current begging man. I am posting this because there are some clarifications that need to be made. I am not that weak to beg like that. Don't bother your younger siblings with force just because you were born first in that short period of time. The order of birth is not to be trusted, so always be nice in advance." Then he shared the actual Kakao Talk conversation between them. Seokjung wrote, "But really, this is a bit unfair. When did I ever put my hands together and say Seokjin Nim? I was in a lower and more graceful position while saying Seokjin Hyung Nim." And Jin replied, True. I toned down the story a bit because it was going to be broadcast. He toned it down. The version that aired already unflattering to the older brother was the softer cut. And yet these two people, who spent their shared childhood in that friction, built something real together as adults. Jin and his brother opened a Japanese restaurant called Osu Seiramushi in Seoul in 2018, with Jin as the director and Kim Seokjung as the owner. A younger brother channeling the financial influence of a global music career into a business that gives his older brother something to build and run. Then the pandemic hit, and the stakes of that decision became very public. Jin said openly on radio, "My big brother runs a restaurant and he's suffering from the pandemic. Nowadays I talk to him about his difficulties. He recently sold his car to keep his business, so I'm worried about these difficulties." A man worth considerably more than most people in South Korea, publicly worried about his brother selling his car. The concern is real because the relationship is real, not because the wealth creates an obligation, but because somewhere between childhood and adulthood, the person he disliked the most became the person he checks in on during hard times. In 2020, Seokjung got married, and Jin served as the MC for the wedding. The person you actively disliked for the first 17 years of your life, and you're the one standing at the front of the room managing the ceremony. That arc from most disliked to trusted enough to hold the most important day of your adult life doesn't happen through forgiveness alone. It happens through years of proximity, accumulated small choices to keep showing up, and eventually a business venture that ties your names to the same sign. Then Jin went first. As the eldest BTS member, Jin enlisted in the South Korean military on the 13th of December, 2022, turning 30 that same month, which was the age cap under the country's military service law. He was first in alone while the other 6 were still active. When he was discharged on the 11th of June, 2024, all 6 remaining members showed up to greet him outside the military station, each having received pre-approved time off from their own ongoing service. 6 people who arranged their military schedules around one person's homecoming. Back home, he released his solo album Happy and threw himself into variety shows, content, and a solo world tour, a man who spent 18 months in service, returning not tentatively but at full speed. The brother who used to be the most disliked person in his life is now his business partner. The group he spent a decade building went into military service one by one and came out the other side still intact. Kim Seokjin walked into the army first, and the rest followed. That's the shape of a relationship, 7 of them, in fact, built not on perfect circumstances, but on the decision, made repeatedly, to stay. 7 members, 7 relationships, each one completely different in shape, a brother who used to be the most disliked person in the room, a grandmother who raised a child for 14 years in a farming village, a teacher who set an ultimatum, and then changed his mind, a CEO who bet everything on one teenager's demo tape, a leader who walked into management and demanded they bring one person back. None of these relationships were manufactured for a narrative. None of them were designed to be part of a brand. They existed before the fame, or they were forged in the specific pressure of trying to build something from nothing at a company that almost didn't survive long enough to debut. What connects all 7 of these stories is something simple. Every one of these members carried real people into the work. The piano in the corner of Yoongi's childhood home. The grandmother's grave where Taehyung leaves a bottle of Bacchus. The audition room where RM stood because a rapper he'd just met wrote down a phone number. Jungkook crying at the recording of a song he was too embarrassed to present to the people it was about. J-Hope leaving, then coming back, not because of a contract, but because he trusted 6 specific individuals. Jimin standing in a practice studio on a Sunday when every other student had gone home. Jin, the eldest, going first into the military and being met on discharge day by all 6 of the people who had become his family. On the 1st of July 2025, all 7 members appeared together in a Weverse livestream for the first time in years and announced, "We'll be releasing a new BTS album in the spring of next year. We're also planning a world tour alongside the new album. We'll be visiting fans all around the world, so we hope you're as excited as we are." J-Hope, speaking to Weverse magazine about the reunion, said, "After pursuing our own little ventures, we are now coming back together, and I love that for us. These are 7 people who, by every reasonable measure of individual talent, could have built separate careers. Some of them nearly did. Some of them left, came back, or almost never arrived at all. The fact that they ended up in the same room again in 2025, not because they had to, but because they chose to, is itself the product of every relationship this video just documented. The people who shaped them, the ones they lost, the ones they fought for, and the ones they simply refused to walk away from. That's what makes BTS's story worth telling, not the records, the people behind the records. If this video gave you something you didn't know before, or made you see something you already knew in a different way, that's what it was for. Subscribe if you're staying. We'll see you in the next one.